This is difficult. How do I even begin to tell you about the nightmare I've been through? Give me a moment. Let me gather my thoughts. Let me prepare myself to relive the events that led me here. You're going to think I'm insane. You're going to think this isn't true. I can't say I blame you. I still have a hard time believing any of this is real. But damn, the things I've seen. It's been 5 years now. 5 confusing, hard years. You can't even comprehend what I've had to go through. There's no way you'll ever know what I've been forced to surrender. You can't fathom how many things I've had to relearn. And there are still so many questions that absolutely terrify me. But I'm rambling. I told myself I was going to sit down and record everything that happened. I suppose I should start from the beginning. Christ, I don't even know where the beginning is anymore. The watch. It started with the watch. I bought it at a flea market on the day I was going to meet Megan for the first time. I had a date with her that night, a blind date, something one of our mutual friends set up. But the watch, that damn watch. And some kid was selling it at a table, along with dozens of others. They were all different, but I remember that specific one immediately caught my eye. It was made from some kind of black stone, the polished ebony band coiling around my wrist as I tried it on. It was breathtaking, a one-of-a-kind piece. The face was colored red in the center and then faded to black along the edges. The hands were colored in swirls of matching shades. The round face was encircled with a beautiful shining stone, that same inky black practically glowing as I inspected it. It was heavy on my wrist, and I remember liking that. The kid, the damn kid. He was watching me carefully the whole time with this glint in his eye. He knew. Of course he knew. I know that now. He told me I could have it for $5. The price was unbeatable, and he could tell that I had fallen in love with it. I didn't hesitate, purchasing it as quickly as I could pull out my wallet. I was thinking about how it would impress my blind date. The kid snatched the $5 bill from my hand and started packing up his table. I didn't think anything of it, but as I turned to go, he called out to me. I turned around, expecting him to ask for more money. Instead, he had a torn look on his face. And finally, he spoke. "Listen, that watch has an alarm on it. It goes off randomly. It's important you turn the alarm off before it beeps 3 times. Just trust me, okay?" I remember being confused, and rightly so, I suppose. I asked the kid what would happen if I let the watch beep 3 times. His eyes filled with darkness. "If it beeps 3 times, he comes." "Who?" The kid leaned towards me and whispered, his voice hoarse. "The TikTok man." I think I said something rude after this reveal, brushing off the warning as some kind of immature superstition. He was just a kid, probably 10 or 12, with fears he hadn't worked out yet. I think he made me promise to remember what he said before I left. Obviously, if I had actually listened to him, I wouldn't be sitting here right now. I wouldn't be telling you all this. I wouldn't have met the TikTok man. I drummed my fingers on the bar, checking the time on my brand new watch. This Megan girl was late. Not a good sign. I was fighting with my nerves and trying to come up with icebreakers so the date wouldn't fall into uncomfortable silence at any point. It was something I did for most dates, preparing a mental list of questions in case the conversation faltered. I looked around the bar, and pleased with the place I had chosen to meet. It was an intimate location, the brick walls giving it a cozy feel, and the candles on the table steamed the atmosphere. The interior had a high-energy vibe to it, and the tattooed bartender chatted with the patrons in a friendly fashion, making sure everyone had what they needed. It seemed like a perfect first date spot. Every time a girl walked in, my heart would jump, expecting it to be Megan. One of our mutual friends had sent me a picture of her, and she was beautiful. Out of my league, and that made me even more nervous. What was wrong with her? Why was she going out on blind dates? Why didn't she have a boyfriend? I pushed these thoughts away, irritated that my mind was already trying to talk itself out of the situation. She was probably lovely and had just gone through a slew of horrible men and wanted to try something different, something fresh. About 10 minutes later, she walked in and my heart skipped a beat when I saw her. She was just as beautiful as the picture I had seen, even more so. Flowing brown hair, bright blue eyes, and a smile that could knock you dead. I waved her over when our eyes met and she lit up. My stomach did a flip as she slid onto the bar stool next to me, and introductions were officially made. After I ordered her a drink, our conversation flowed into each other's lives, poking and prodding with genuine intrigue about who we were and what we did. She was a college student, about to start her last year of school. I had graduated the year before, and so she drilled me for tips on writing her thesis. She was fun, and I liked how she always had a smile on her lips. Talking to her was easy, and the longer I sat there, the more comfortable I became. Soon the preliminary questions faded, and we began to just shoot the shit. It was easy, wonderfully easy, and I found myself absorbed by her. The drinks kept coming, and I soon found myself enjoying a nice buzz. I made sure I didn't say anything stupid, the alcohol pushing me to try my luck with her sexually. I resisted for as long as I could, but eventually I caved and began to flirt. And to my surprise, she flirted back with enthusiasm. I had my hand on her thigh, and a big grin on my face when it happened for the first time. Megan looked at me, a slightly tipsy grin on her face. "Was that your watch?" she asked, nodding towards my wrist. I blinked my buzz away and held my watch up to my face. Well, the kid hadn't been lying about the alarm. I began to fumble for a button and some way to turn it off before it beeped again. I wasn't even thinking about the kid's warning, I just wanted to stop the annoying interruption. "Am I keeping you from something?" Megan asked, as the watch blared out another note. My fingers finally found a small button on the side and I pushed it. "Sorry about that, I just bought this thing. I guess someone programmed an alarm on it before me." "I really like it," Megan said, reaching out and taking my wrist. "It's a very handsome watch. It makes you look smart." I was enjoying the way her hands felt on my skin, and I felt my heart begin to race as her fingers traced my wrist along the band. Our eyes met, and I saw lust behind her shining eyes. I swallowed. Did she want me to take her home? "It's getting late," she said coyly, and turning my wrist in her hands to check the time. You want to get out of here?" "Yeah, absolutely," I stammered, scrambling to remember how long ago I had purchased the condom in my wallet. "Any ideas on where you want to go?" Megan asked, still smiling. "Well," I said, my mind avalanching. "My apartment it's trashed right now." I died a little inside as the honesty came pouring from my lips. She chuckled. "That's okay. I'm staying with my parents over summer break and they're gone for the weekend. So we can go to my place if you want. We have a pool." She said this last part with a wink, and I couldn't believe my luck. Did that mean she wanted to go skinny dipping? "That sounds great," I said, reaching into my back pocket for my wallet. I cashed this out, and we left the bar. She told me her parents' place wasn't far, about 10 minutes outside of town, out in the country hills. She said I could follow her in my car, and so we parted ways momentarily. I climbed into my vehicle and let out a soft cry of victory. I couldn't believe this was happening. Who would have known things would go so well? As I followed her car out of the parking lot, I forced myself to calm down. I wasn't going to get laid if I was a nervous wreck. I had to play it cool. I had to act like it was, like it was whatever. "Oh, you're such an idiot," I muttered to myself, but smiled just the same. I couldn't remember the last time I had gotten some, and so easily to boot. It never was such a high-caliber girl as Megan. I thought back on who the last girl was and what she looked like. It slowly dawned on me, and I immediately shut her face out of my mind. "You had way too much to drink that night," I said out loud, shuddering. The streets were dark in the late hour, and soon I left the town behind me, my eyes trained on Megan's taillights. I rolled down the window, letting the warm summer air fill the car with electrifying possibility. I was in such a damn good mood. The full moon hung fat and yellow in the sky. I made a gun with my fingers and shot an imaginary bullet as the wind whipped through my hair. I felt pretty cool. Again? I thought, immediately annoyed by the noise. How often does this thing go off? No wonder that kid seemed so eager to get rid of it. I fumbled in the dark interior of my car, keeping one eye on the road as I felt for the off button. I searched for the slight incline along the side of the watch, and when my fingers made contact, I pushed it. I waited for another beep, but none followed. Not long after, I was pulling up behind Megan, a fairly large house looming before us. I stopped the car in the driveway and got out, appraising her home. The house was big, maybe 5 bedrooms, and the yard looked well kept. Everything about it boasted money. It was on a spacious plot of land, rolling green hills spanning around the sides, and I heard the gentle sway of heavy woods from the back. "Not bad," I stated, walking to Megan, who was getting out of her car. "My dad makes some pretty good money," she said, smiling. She suddenly took my hand and pulled me along after her. I didn't resist. We went around the side of the house to the back, towards the pool. It was surrounded by a white fence, and Megan pulled the gate open to let us in. The water glistened in the moonlight, and I felt a shiver of excitement run through me despite the warm air. Megan went to one of the white plastic chairs that lined the sides of the pool and sat down, kicking off her heels and reaching behind her to pull her shirt off. She saw me watching and grinned. "Turn around and don't look until you hear a splash." I complied, licking my lips in anticipation. This was like a dream come true. I heard her undress, and then a loud splash followed shortly after. I turned back around as her head broke the surface. The house was dark, emitting no light, but I could still see her smiling at me in the moonlight. I kicked my shoes off and pulled my shirt over my head. She watched me, waiting in the middle of the pool, eyes alight. I took my pants off and carefully undid my watch and placed it on my pants. Even with my boxers on, I felt exposed. Behind the fence, the thick woods danced in the warm breeze, as if to laugh at me. "Well, come on in," Megan invited. I didn't hesitate and took a running leap into the waiting water. My breath was raw from my lungs as the cool water enveloped me. I sputtered to the surface, gasping and wiping my eyes. Megan laughed at my obvious shock and dove underwater. I followed her lead, enjoying where this was headed. We splashed around for a little while, chasing each other and laughing. I commented on how good she looked in the moonlight, and she swam closer, her glistening skin an absolute wonder. I swallowed hard as she stepped in front of me and wrapped her arms around my neck. "I think I like you," she said softly, smiling. I didn't hesitate. I wrapped my arms around her and pulled her into me. I kissed her, letting the moment last, the water quietly lapping around us. It was perfect. The full moon, the dead silence, the isolation and the energy, everything. I ignored my watch, the alarm barely registering in my mind. I pressed Megan against the side of the pool. Both of us lost. "Let's go inside," Megan said breathlessly. "Come on." I didn't argue. We went to her back door, and as she placed her hand on the knob, a noise echoed through the night, stopping us in our tracks. It was the loud gong of a clock, and it came from the woods. We both stared at each other, the eeriness of it momentarily stalling ourselves. "What was that?" I asked, my view of the woods blocked by the pool's white fence. She looked back at me, and I saw she was just as confused. "That sounded like an old grandfather clock, right? What the hell?" I cocked my head at her. "Is there a house in the woods? And because that's where it sounded like it came from." "No," she said, shaking her head. "There's nothing out here." It looked like she was about to say something else when the sound repeated, this time much louder. "What in the world?" I muttered, jumping at the noise. It had sounded like it was at the edge of the woods, behind the fence. The kid's warning suddenly rushed back to me. "Don't let it beep 3 times." That was ridiculous, though. What did he say would happen? The TikTok man would come? Whatever that meant. Besides, that was just some dumb story he had just made up. It was just a watch. It didn't hold any power. It couldn't summon some weird figment of imagination. "This is kind of freaking me out," Megan said, huddling next to me, her shivering body dripping wet. She wasn't naked, but she might as well have been. "Let me go around and take a look," I said, taking her by the shoulders. "There's nothing to be afraid of." I felt a little uneasy, but I thought if I showed her how brave I was, it would get us back on track. Megan nodded and I went to the gate. I pushed it open and looked towards the tree line, which began at the edge of the fence. I thought I heard something making its way closer, walking along the length of the fence towards the corner in front of me. I trained my ears and felt my heart begin to thunder in my chest. There was definitely something coming. The snap of branches and foliage underfoot announcing the arrival of whatever it was. And there was another sound I was picking up as well. It sounded like the ticking of clocks. Dozens of them, their passage of time all mixing together to create a constant jumble of tick-tock, tick-tock. "What the hell?" I muttered, trying to calm myself. The noise drew closer and closer and closer. And then, something walked around the corner of the fence towards me. I felt a scream rise in my throat as my eyes tried to make sense of what I was seeing. My breath drained from my lungs like air from a tire. My legs turned to liquid, and yet my knees locked in place, cementing me where I stood in frozen horror. It was about 7 feet tall, its black skin absorbing the moonlight around it. Its body looked human, but twisted and bent over, its movements coming in short jerks of twitching muscle. It walked on 2 legs like a person, but its feet were solid slabs of coned black meat. Its chest and shoulders were embedded with glowing red circles of different size. As I stared, I realized that the orbs were clock faces, all burned into its tormented flesh, and slowly ticking. The source of noise made clear now. Its head was bloated and mangled, its mouth hanging limply open, its jaw swaying as it walked, held onto its face by cords of thin gold chain. It had no eyes, but instead, a giant clock face filled the top half of its head, with black infected skin growing around it. It glowed red in the center, and then faded to black, just like my watch. The hands on the clock were in a constant twirl of chaos, spinning with no discernible meaning, and rising out of its back, in a mass of wood and flesh, was the top half of an old grandfather clock. It jutted from the creature's torn flesh, rising from its body 3 feet high. The weight of it pushed down on the monster, causing it to hunch over slightly. Its movement slowed. The grandfather clock was made of charred wood, and tiny spires rising from its peak. The face was colored like my watch as well, but the hands held steady at midnight, a smaller third hand ticking away the seconds. I slowly backed away from the creature, never taking my eyes from it. It was about 20 feet away from me and slowly advancing. I felt a trickle of sweat run down my spine as my mind tried to make sense of the impossible figure before me. I kept expecting to blink and have it vanish, but it just kept walking towards me. Its face was trained in my direction, the large clock hands spinning madly. Its jaw swung limply from the gold chains, the blast of sparkling color a sharp contrast to the black of its skin. The creature emitted a noise, a low growl like the turning of gears in heavy machinery. I had never heard anything like it before, and it chilled my bones right down to the marrow. It flexed its long, sharp fingers at me, the ends coming to needle-like points. As it came closer, I sensed that this entity intended me harm, and that it was coming to kill me. The constant tick-tocking from its body filled the night air and seemed to count down the seconds I had left to live. I suddenly snatched from my trance-like state. The danger of my situation ignited me into action. I turned and ran, throwing the gate open and sprinting to Megan, who waited for me by the back door. Adrenaline coursed through my veins, turning my blood to fire. Megan sensed my panic as I charged her, and her eyes went wide with fear. Questions began to blossom from her lips, but I cut her off in a hurry. "Inside, now," I said, skidding to a halt and throwing a look over my shoulder. The open gate showed nothing but a slice of night, but I could hear the thing ticking its way closer. "What's wrong? What is it?" Megan cried as she fumbled with the door. I didn't answer as she turned the knob, and I pushed us both in. I quickly slammed the door behind us and locked it, and turning to look out of the small square window in the center of the door. I cocked my head so that I could see, and my breath froze in my lungs. It was staring right at me, its body filling the gateway. It was slowly moving its fingers as if thinking, the clock in its face glowing red. I ducked down and slid to the floor, placing a hand over my beating heart. I sat with my back to the wood as Megan stood over me and peeked out the window. Her reaction was similar to mine, a sharp gasp of horrified confusion, and then she was sitting next to me, clutching me and asking me what that was. I didn't have an answer for her, so I remained silent, begging my mind to kick into gear. I needed to do something. I didn't know what this thing was or where it had come from, but I knew it wanted to kill us. I sat there stupidly, soaking wet and in my boxers, as Megan's desperate pleas washed over me in a numb wave. I didn't know what she wanted me to do, what she expected me to do. After a few minutes of sitting in the dark, Megan slowly stood and took another look from the window. "It's gone," she announced breathlessly. It's gone." For some reason, her words didn't comfort me. She might not be able to see it, but it surely wasn't gone. "Why didn't you listen to that kid?" I thought. "Why didn't you just turn off the stupid alarm?" I knew in retrospect that it was easy to blame myself, but realistically, why should I have believed the kid's warning? We don't prepare for the impossible, because it's just that, the impossible. I slowly stood, the house silent. I looked around, and in the dim darkness I could see we were in the basement. At the far end of the room, a staircase led up to a closed door. I turned and took a quick look through the window and saw nothing but calm night. "We need to get out of here," Megan whispered urgently. I know, I said, running my fingers through my hair. "Just let me think." My thoughts were cut short as a loud noise exploded upstairs above us. Jesus Christ, did it just kick in the front door? Megan's eyes were wide, and I felt her hand grip my arm. And then, the basement door erupted in a violent blast of splinters, the wood fragments rocketing down the stairs towards us. Megan let out a scream as the tick-tock man filled the dark doorway. The clocks that were fused into its skin gave off a soft, red glow, washing his skin with haunting color. The grandfather clock on its back was too tall for him to fit in the stairway, and so it slowly got on its hands and knees and began to crawl down towards us. Megan was clawing at me, screaming for me, but I just stood and watched in horror as it slid down the stairs, the basement filling with the sound of a dozen ticking clocks. It reached the end of them and stood back up, not 10 feet from us. My heart was a block of ice in my chest, and my legs felt sluggish and heavy as I begged them to move. Air hissed between my dry lips and my throat burned with an effort to breathe. As the tick-tock man stood, I noticed the time when the grandfather clock had advanced. Instead of midnight, the hands read 12:15. I didn't know if it meant anything, and my brain was too scrambled to try. "Get away from us," Megan was screaming. She turned and grabbed the door behind us, fumbling in the dark trying to unlock it. Just as I heard the click of her successful attempts, the monster before us moved. I expected it to rush us, but instead it gripped its own throat and pushed its head back. The clock hands on its body began to spin faster, and the red color in the center of each of them began to glow brighter. And then, a noise erupted from its mouth, a deafening blast of sound. I slammed my hands over my ears and saw Megan do the same, the volume of its chimes aching in my ears. I felt like my head was going to split, and I squeezed my eyes shut against the blasts. I felt myself growing weak, the black behind my eyelids swimming in and out of focus. Something was happening to me. The gonging kept going, each note followed quickly by another, the offensively loud sound cracking my skull open and rattling my brain. I felt like my head would pop, unable to take the shock waves of pain with each toll. And then suddenly, it stopped. My head rocked with agony, and I clutched my temples, eyes still shut. I felt the world shimmer and then refocus around me. And slowly, I opened my eyes. Something was wrong. The proportions of everything was off, the furniture and ceiling looming overhead. I felt dizzy, and I stumbled as I took in this contorted reality. No, it wasn't reality that had shifted. It was me. I looked down at my body and felt panic roar in my chest like a screaming inferno. I was young again. I looked at my hands and little legs, and testing my weight in a hurried attempt to acquaint myself with this new horror. I couldn't be more than 2 years old, but my mind remained the same. It was trapped in a younger version of myself, and as I opened my mouth to speak, nothing but a choked gurgling came out. It was like the words became garbled as they rose from my throat, and distorted by the inexperience of youth. I turned my head and saw Megan had suffered the same fate. Big tears rolled down her face as she stared at me in absolute disbelief. We were toddlers, and shrunk back down as our years were taken back from us. Broken syllables and sounds poured from her mouth as she tried to speak to me, but I couldn't understand any of it. We were trapped inside younger versions of ourselves, our minds held captive in underdeveloped bodies. And suddenly, the TikTok man was towering above us. He looked terrifyingly huge from where I stood, my neck craning to take in his looming form. Megan screamed, her voice a high-pitched wail, and she scrambled to get away. She stumbled and fell, unaccustomed to the way her body worked. She struggled to pull herself upright, and I saw her arms quivering with effort. And then it hit me just how defenseless we were right now. The danger suddenly horrifyingly real. I took off in the opposite direction, away from Megan, away from the monster. My little feet took me across the room towards the couch where I ducked and hid. My muscles already ached from the effort, and I sucked in big breaths, trying to fill my lungs with oxygen. I couldn't believe how weak I was, how easily I tired. I heard Megan screaming, and I got down on all fours and crawled under the couch. I peeked through the skirt on the other side and saw the TikTok man bending down to pick Megan up. He clutched her in one hand, his long, sharp fingers wrapping around her head, and lifted her squirming body from the floor. In one quick motion, it twisted her head and pulled it from her shoulders with a sick popping sound. Blood splashed to the ground, and Megan's cries were cut short as she was forcefully decapitated. I felt bile charge up my throat, the horrific scene slamming into my senses, and I vomited onto the floor. The creature turned my way, and I noticed that the hands on the grandfather clock now read 12:30. I hurriedly scooted backwards, hiding myself under the couch's skirt. I held my breath, eyes squeezed shut as tears leaked from them. I rubbed a chubby hand against my nose, wiping away snot, begging to turn invisible. But then the couch flew off of me and tossed aside by the enormous monster. I screamed, my underdeveloped vocal cords vibrating in a high shriek. I scrambled to get away, but my sluggish muscles wouldn't react fast enough. I saw it swing its long, sharp hand at me, and I ducked, desperately trying to avoid the same fate as Megan. I wasn't fast enough, though, and I took the impact across my shoulders. Pain splintered through my body, and I went airborne, soaring through the room and into the window. I crashed through it and went tumbling into the night air, landing hard in the pool area. The rough cement unforgiving on my skin. I came to a stop by the pool's edge and lay gasping, my breath beaten out of me. Everything hurt, and jolts of sharp pain coursed along the left side of my small body. My legs and knees were bleeding, leaving red streaks on my vulnerable flesh. I blinked back darkness, forcing myself to keep my eyes open. I knew that if I closed them, I would never open them again. In a daze, I saw the tick-tock man climb through the shattered remains of the window, ducking down to allow the grandfather clock access to the outside. It read 12:45. That can't be right. The hands are moving too fast. And then another thought drifted up from my scattered mind. Maybe time is different where it comes from. I forced myself to get up, my body screaming in protest. I realized that I was crying, my cheeks wet with tears. Move, I told myself. You have to move or you're dead. Crying out, I hobbled towards the open gate, a last-ditch effort to get away from the murderous monster. It had pulled itself completely from the window when it spotted me, and pathetically limping towards the open gate, a look of utter terror on my face. I wasn't moving fast enough. He's going to rip your head off, I thought, and tears flowing from my eyes. You have to do something. I suddenly turned around, hearing the creature close behind me. My body in shambles, I dashed to where I had left my clothes, my shoulders screaming in protest. My legs felt like they were on fire, and every time I exhaled, blood and drool flew from my lips. I reached the chair I had left my clothes and snatched the watch from where I had left it. I turned around, holding it out in front of me like a shield. The tick-tock man froze, mere feet from me, the sight of the watch freezing it in its tracks. I had no plan, no hope, just a prayer and a dying wish. We stood staring at each other, neither one of us moving. For some reason, the sight of the watch kept it frozen in place. The black stone it was made from felt hot in my hands, and I gripped it tighter. I didn't know what kind of power it had over this entity, but I slowly backed up, keeping the watch held out in front of me. I never took my eyes from it. Circling around the pool, waiting for the creature to suddenly lurch into motion, but it remained where it stood, slowly turning to watch me as I came around the far side and slowly made my way to the gate. I could hear a mechanical growl coming from deep in its chest, a roaring anger, a deep hunger. I got to the gate and glanced out, my eyes going to the tree line. I had to try and make it. It was my only hope. I turned and ran, going as fast as my broken body could take me. As soon as the watch broke contact with the monster, I heard it howl, the sound echoing in the night like clanging chimes. I knew it wouldn't be far behind me, and I begged my clumsy body to move faster, trying my best to ignore the agony it was in. My feet barely shuffled through the grass, the tree line seeming impossibly far away. A breeze rustled the treetops, and I heard the tick-tock man explode through the fence behind me. The earth vibrated under my feet as I felt it take long strides towards me, but I dared not look back. But then I fell, my body simply giving up. I crashed to the ground with a cry, the watch flying from my hands. I hit the dirt with a grunt, and a new wave of pain gripped me. I grit what teeth I had and began to crawl towards the trees, my tiny fists grabbing handfuls of dewy grass. I knew I was dead, but then I felt a strong hand grip my ankle, and I was lifted into the air. I dangled upside down, screaming as the tick-tock man pulled me up. Its form was hideous up close, its skin reeking and giving off a nauseating heat. I battered at it with powerless fists, yelling, howling. It gripped my head with its other hand, and I was flipped upright, dangling from its grip in a helpless heap. This was it. It growled with pleasure, a rumbling turning of gears, and I waited for the end. I closed my eyes. I snapped them open, the sudden sound unexpected and deafening. I blinked and saw the grandfather clock on its back had struck 1. And then the tick-tock man went into a rage, thrashing its arms about, its dozens of clock faces exploding in red color. The hand spun at an increased speed and I was tossed to the ground. I landed in the grass, wincing and letting out another cry as I came to a stop. I turned my head and saw another impossibility. Gold chains snaked out of the grandfather clock like the coils of 100 snakes. They moved on their own accord, sliding around the tick-tock man's flesh, wrapping themselves in tight knots, binding him. The monster screamed in rage, furious that it had been mere seconds away from killing me. The chains continued to snake out from its back, covering its body in layers and layers of dense gold. In a matter of seconds, the creature was completely enveloped by its bindings, and I watched in horrific fascination as the cluster of gold began to shrink. I expected flesh and blood to come squirting from the chains, but they remained spotless and shining in the moonlight. The howls from the monster never ceased as the chains seemed to shrink in on themselves, the mass growing smaller and smaller until finally, the nightmare simply winked out of existence. I lay there in the grass, my breath coming in burning gulps, unable to believe what I had just witnessed. Blood pulsed in my ears, and my heartbeat was a desperate drumbeat. I closed my eyes and let the darkness take me. It's been 5 years since now. 5 years have passed. I survived that bloody night, though I don't know how. My body was a mangled mess, and I've had to do intense rehab ever since. In a stroke of pure blessing, Megan's parents came home early from out of town. When they saw the broken glass and the blood, they called the police. And then they found the headless body of their daughter, reduced unexplainably back to her early years. I wasn't conscious for any of this. The police found me laying in the grass when they arrived. I was rushed to the hospital, and by some miracle I survived. When I woke up in the hospital, I rubbed my eyes and felt something heavy on my wrist. The watch. Somehow, I was wearing that fucking watch. You see, I can't get rid of it. No matter how hard I try, no matter what I do. When I fall asleep, I wake up wearing it again. I've tried smashing it, burying it, burning it, but nothing works. It always returns, looking brand new. I've thought back to when I bought it, from that kid, and I wonder if the only way to pass this curse off is to sell it to another unlucky soul. I've thought about it. Oh, have I thought about it? But no matter how much I hate this, how much this monstrous thing has destroyed my life, it is, in fact, my burden to bear. I can't pass this off to someone else. I can't give them the horror I know will come. Because you see, the alarm still goes off. It's random, completely unpredictable. Sometimes months will pass and it'll remain silent. Other times it'll go off 3 times in one day. There's no pattern or reason for it. It's a monster of its own makings. I fear going to sleep, afraid that if it goes off in the middle of the night, I won't hear it. I'm afraid the TikTok man will come back and finish the job, summoned by the watch on the 3rd chime. So now it's a part of me, this damn watch. I've learned to live with it, as best I can. But the fear won't go away. I don't think it ever will. Because I know that one day I won't turn off the alarm in time. I know that it's going to come back for me. And I've got a lot of years ahead of me. I'm 7 years old now. I'm 7 years old again. I live in a foster home, a quiet outcast who just wants to be left alone. The family I'm with are good people, but they don't understand the weird things I say sometimes. And how could they? I'm a 28-year-old trapped in a 7-year-old body. And let me tell you, living through life again is not something I would wish on anyone. Life, it's full of monsters, waiting to rip you apart, over and over and over again. I reclined in my chair, enjoying the hot sun on my face. The waves before me crashed with rhythmic purpose, and I felt myself growing sleepy. The seagulls called overhead. The air smelled of salt and suntan lotion. Things were good. I sat up, rubbing my eyes in the afternoon heat, and dug my toes into the sand. I watched as a father helped his little boy build a sandcastle. What a good dad. I took my sunglasses off of my head and slid them onto my face, standing and stretching. I loved the beach. It was impossible to be worried about anything here. I had come here for the weekend, my little oceanfront cottage standing timidly behind me. I purchased it a year ago. My recent business ventures allowing me some of life's finer luxuries. If only I had someone to share it with. And perhaps later in the evening, I'd chance a trip to the local bars and see if I could round up some company. Not that I minded the isolation. After all, it was hard to feel lonely when surrounded by such beauty. I rubbed the back of my neck. My fingers came away coated in sweat. It was time for a dip. I tossed my sunglasses onto the beach chair and slowly walked towards the water's edge. Frothing residue lapped at my feet, followed by the dying reach of a small wave. I sighed. It felt amazing. Smiling, I charged the rolling mass of sparkling ocean. As the water splashed around my waist, I took a deep breath and dove under. I came up gasping, wiping my eyes, the skin glistening in the sunlight. I waved to a group of girls who were body surfing to my left and dove under again. Let them watch. The green water peaked and sloshed around me as I swam further out, enjoying the exercise. I felt the sleepiness drain from my body as my muscles heated. I flipped over on my back and continued to stroke out to sea, closing my eyes against the brilliance of the burning sun. Eventually, I slowed my backstroke and floated onto the surface, letting the tide rock me in its arms. My ears filled and emptied with water, and I listened to both worlds, the one above and the one below. The ocean had always filled me with a sense of wonderment. We were one, but separate, two sides of the same coin. After some time, I lifted my head from the water and shook clinging diamonds out of my hair. I blinked against the salt stinging my eyes and realized that I was a lot further out than I thought. The shore was a deceptive stretch of cool brown sand that remained an uncomfortable distance away. I realized that I couldn't touch the bottom. I dove under, trying to gauge how deep the water was, and when I surfaced, I felt my heart begin to race. I was entirely too far out. I forced myself to remain calm and started to swim towards shore. There weren't many people in the water, and I didn't think anyone could even see me out here. I focused on my strokes, keeping my head down and my arms moving. I could feel my muscles begin to burn, and I chanced to look towards shore. It appeared as if I hadn't moved at all. Swallowing hard, I dove underwater and began to pull myself through the swirling green. I kicked my legs out and jutted myself towards land as effectively as I could muster. When my lungs began to ache, I reached for the surface and came up sputtering. Again, it appeared as if I hadn't swam at all. And that's when I felt the pull around my legs. I was in a riptide, a nasty one. My body felt drained and the beach looked impossibly far away still. A nest of worms wriggled in my stomach, and my breathing became frantic. I tried to fight off the panic, but it was like trying to stop an avalanche. I frantically tried to recall what I was supposed to do in a situation like this. I didn't want to scream for help for fear of tiring myself out to the point of exhaustion. Weren't you supposed to swim parallel to the shore or something? Taking a deep breath, I dove to my left. With each stroke, I felt my body get heavier. Soon my arms felt like slabs of stone, and my legs like cement anchors. And then I went under. Terror worked against me, filling my limbs with fire. I tried to pull myself to the surface, but only managed a mouthful of salty ocean. I gagged and spun underwater, my lungs pounding against my chest. My heart beat a desperate cry in my ears. I managed to find the surface again, but it drained what little adrenaline I still had. I sucked down one gasp of air before I went under. My limbs were useless, completely spent. Soon my head began to ache from a lack of oxygen, and I snapped my eyes open in horror, searching for the surface. A dark green haze filled my vision, terribly claustrophobic. It pressed in around me as I felt the riptide pull me back into its merciless jaws. Darkness began to fill my vision. My chest howled for air, but the water held me with wet chains. I felt myself begin to fade, pulled apart in agony. My body sank deeper and deeper, and my hazy eyes searched hopelessly for a savior. Just as the black rushed in on me, I noticed something beneath me. It was a mass of sparkling color, like a cloud filled with neon electricity. It stretched out below me like a storm, flashing and winking like it was the broken remains of some natural phenomenon. Right as my feet were about to enter the mass, I passed out. I felt something cold on my face. Moving darkness, a voice. I focused on the voice, pulling my subconscious towards it with all my willpower. The black began to fade. Light. Color. The world swam in an explosion of blurry motion, and then I blinked. I sat up gasping, eyes popping open. The sweat poured from my face, and I scrubbed it from my eyes. Where was I? What had happened? I looked around and saw I was in some kind of hut.
Hey, take it easy. It's okay.
I spun around towards the voice behind me. My heart clawed up my throat, and I stumbled off the cot I had been resting on, horror ripping across my mind. A man sat naked before me. But he wasn't quite a man. He was mutated. The skin beneath his eyes drooped down his cheeks, exposing angry red muscle that oozed with clear slime. His nose hung from his face, dangling like the trunk of an elephant. He was bald, and the top of his head was slit open. I watched in terrified disgust as a second tongue extended from the opening and licked moisture across his scalp. Drool dripped down his ears in thick trails. What the fuck? What is going on? Where am I? I screamed, backing myself into a corner, wooden straw poking at me from the wall. The man stood up, his nose swaying like a piece of melted taffy.
It's all right. It's okay. You're safe. You made it. You're here.
I stared up at him with wide eyes. What are you? Where am I? The man put aside a wet cloth he had been using to wipe my face. He held up his hands and approached me, squatting before me, a smile on his lips.
I am Luval. I was the one that found you on the beach. I'm so happy you're here. We've been praying for this moment for...
His eyes rolled in wonderment.
Oh, we've prayed for so long.
I held up my hands, stopping him, grimacing as the second tongue slurped across his head. The drool leaked down into his face and dripped slowly across his exposed muscles beneath his eyes. You need to tell me what's going on, I said, trying to collect myself. The last thing I remember was drowning. I got caught in a riptide and something weird in the water. The man, Luval, smiled.
I can't even imagine what you're going through right now. But the important thing is that you're here. You've passed through the red cloud. You've done what none have done before. It's not much, a mere pinprick in its mass, but you can show us how to do it. You can show us how to get through.
I was shaking my head slowly, mouth open. Stop. Please. I have no idea what you're talking about. I don't know anything about this. I was just taking a swim in the ocean and got pulled under by a riptide. My mind was spinning with confusion. What the hell was this person, thing talking about? The red cloud, tearing a hole through it. I wasn't following, and the constant twist of unease in my gut wasn't helping. Luval nodded understandingly.
It's only natural you're a little scrambled. I can't fathom what the red cloud did to you as you passed. The suffering you must have endured. It really is a testament to who you are, what you've come here to do.
I licked my lips, head aching as I tried to comprehend what was going on. Who I am? And to my horror, Luval reached out and stroked my face.
Why, you're an angel come to save us. You're here to show us the way to heaven. You've broken the barrier, passed through the red cloud, and now you will lead us back with you.
I blinked, confusion blasting through my mind like a cannonball. I tried to sort my thoughts and tried to piece together what had happened to me. Everything felt wrong. Everything felt different. My head ached and I clutched my temples, trying to focus. I had been swimming, then the riptide, sinking down into that darkness, sinking down into that strange cloud of light. Had that been real? Or had that been something I imagined? My dying mind conjuring up some strange hallucination. And then, Luval reached out a hand.
Come, the others will want to meet you. You're going to be their savior, after all.
I let him pull me to my feet. I couldn't make sense of any of this. What was happening to me? Awareness settled in around me as I stood and realized we were in a windowless hut made of straw and wood. The sand beneath my feet rose to swallow my ankles, and I deducted we must still be on the beach. But what beach, and who was this disgusting man before me? Who were the others? What did they expect of me?
I can see you're having a hard time remembering,
Luval said.
Come, let us go outside. Maybe once you see, it will help rattle your memory.
Bewildered and uneasy, I let him lead me through the door. Sunlight erupted across my vision, and I winced, shading my eyes with my hand. I squinted, letting the world settle. I froze. Luval stopped before me and turned, his second tongue rolling across his bald head. He smiled.
Behold, behold your flock,
he said, spreading his arms. I was standing on a sand dune above a beach filled with people who looked just like Luval. They were all looking at me with awe in their eyes. 1,000 naked bodies, all with drooping noses and slits in their heads. Tongue rolled in and out of their skulls, creating a constant squirting sound that echoed across the expanse of sand. Slowly, they all got down on their knees and bowed their heads in silence. What the hell is going on? I muttered in shock, eyes growing wide, heart thundering in my chest. And that's when I saw something in the sky, past the congregation, hanging over the ocean. It was a long black chain that extended from the heavens. It hung over the water, 200 or 300 feet from shore. At the end of the chain was the motionless, charred body of a man. But he was huge, at least 9 or 10 feet tall. The chain was wrapped around his neck, and his dark crested head rested on his shoulders in complete stillness. My eyes traced the chain up the length of the sky, and it disappeared through the clouds. Where am I? I asked, my stomach squirming as a new fear surged in my gut. Luval stepped towards me.
"You're here, with us. Don't you remember? We've prayed for you to come, begged God to send an angel to lead us to him, and now you have. You've emerged from the red cloud, broken through its dark walls, and come to lead us to heaven."
"No," I whispered. "No, that's not true. I don't know anything about this place. I'm not an angel. I'm just a person." Luval pointed at my face.
"You're wrong. Don't you know how beautiful you look? Your skin, your eyes, your hair."
He placed his hand over his naked chest.
"When I found you on the beach, I almost fainted. You're the most beautiful angel we could have dreamed for. You're perfect."
I swallowed hard, backing up. "And stop talking like that. I'm not an angel. I'm just a normal fucking person." Luval frowned.
"Please, don't speak like that. You've just been affected by the red cloud. It will fade. You will remember who you are."
I pointed towards the massive charred man in the sky. If I'm an angel, then who is that? Luval turned and I could see him visibly tense.
"That's the hanged man. He's what you've come to deliver us from."
I shook my head. "What is he?"
"He watches over the red cloud beneath the water. He is our warden, our oppressor. He is the gatekeeper. If anyone tries to break through, he will stop them."
Luval looked at me and his sagging eyes grew dark.
"He is the shadow of God, the darkness that grew behind the light of the Lord. He is evil incarnate."
I could feel my breath begin to sputter in my throat. This was all too much. I couldn't digest it, and couldn't wrap my mind around this bizarre ataxia. I just wanted to get out of here, and get away from this nightmare, and back to my beach house. The strange mass of people kneeling before me, the red cloud, the hanged man. I could feel madness approaching. All constructs of reason and understanding crumbling before me. "Please," I croaked. "Please, I just want to go home. I don't belong here. This isn't right. Please." I suddenly saw a hardness enter Luval's eyes.
"You need to stop talking like that. You came here to save us. You came here to lead us through the red cloud to heaven. You're going to take us back with you. We've waited and prayed for this day for an eternity. You can't turn your back on us. You're the only one who's managed to make it through, to make it past the hanged man. You have to show us the way."
"No," I cried, suddenly overcome with a wave of dizziness. "No, I'm not the one you've been praying for. Please." I put my hand to my head, the heat from the sun splitting my mind in two. I blinked and began to see patches of darkness. I stumbled backwards, blinking sluggishly. "I'm not your angel." And then I blacked out. I awoke in a rush of heat. My face felt damp and my mind swirled between worlds. My eyes snapped open and I immediately sat up. The sweat dripped off of my nose and my throat was dry and parched. I pulled a hand across my eyes and blinked. Luval was sitting beside me, his long nose hanging from his face like an infected skin tag, his second tongue slowly coating his scalp with saliva. As I raised my eyes, I saw there were others in the hut. They stood by the door, watching me, their eyes oozing clear slime that dripped down their drooping cheeks.
"Hot today, isn't it?"
Luval said from his place by my cot.
"Are you feeling okay? You fainted on us."
I shifted on my bedding and warily eyed my guests by the door. They seemed to be in awe. My stomach turned as I watched drool leak down their skin across their naked bodies. The tongues squirming from their heads looked like bloated worms, and I tasted bile on my tongue.
"They want to hear you speak,"
Luval said quietly, and placing a hand on my thigh.
"They want to know what to do."
I jerked away from his touch and shook my head. "I told you, I'm not an angel. I don't know what this place is or how I got here. I can't help you. I'm sorry." As I spoke, Luval's eyes grew hard. He reached out and grasped my thigh again, his grip now firm and commanding. He spoke with cold authority.
"It's time you fulfilled your duty. We don't want to hear any more excuses. Show us how to get past the hanged man. Show us how to get to heaven."
He stood and motioned for me to do the same.
"Come, let's go outside."
I rose with him, not sure what else to do. We walked towards the door, and the others stepped aside to let us pass, bowing their heads slightly. No matter what I said, it seemed they were stuck on the idea that I was some kind of angel. We went outside and I stopped dead in my tracks. The congregation was lying down on the beach, hands at their sides, like rows and rows of forgotten corpses. When they saw me emerge from the hut, they stirred to life, crawling to their knees where they remained, hands on their naked thighs. They were waiting. Behind them, over the water, the hanged man remained motionless, his body static at the end of the long chain.
"Come, you must speak to them,"
Luval said at my side, placing a hand on my shoulder. "No," I whispered, feeling uneasy. "No, you don't understand. I can't help you people." Luval's grip turned to iron, pushing me forward towards the dunes.
"Come, it's time you showed us the way."
I stumbled forward, my bare feet burning in the sand. The sun blazed down from a cloudless sky, and I saw thousands of eyes follow me as I walked along the dunes. Hopeful, desperate eyes. I watched them below me, the beach alive with movement as their tongues slithered across their bald heads, cooling them from the sun's burning light. I looked past them, towards the hanged man, squinting to catch any sign of movement. He remained immobile, his huge, charred body dangling helplessly from the chain. His eyes remained shut and his chest still. As far as I could tell, he was dead. Maybe there was something to that. Maybe that was the answer to my problem. These people, how long had it been since they attempted to pass through this red cloud? How long had it been since this hanged man last stirred? I continued to be led across the dunes, sweat pouring from my face. I felt like I was suffocating, my throat a dry strip of sandpaper. It was impossibly hot. I could feel my skin cooking beneath the intense light, and I ran my tongue along my cracked lips. What did Luval expect me to say to these people? As the burning sand danced between my toes, I was struck with a thought. When am I going to wake up? I almost laughed, but the sudden humor died in my dehydrated mouth. I looked behind me at Luval and the little party following us. They looked excited. They looked hopeful. It made me sick. I had no plan, no idea what was happening to me. I had grown an army of followers who thought I was some kind of savior. I was trapped in a nightmare, and I didn't see any way out. One moment I had been drowning, and the next I was standing before a congregation who expected some kind of sermon from me. They expected me to reveal the path to salvation. What could I say that would make them understand? What could I do to show them I wasn't an angel?
"This is good,"
Luval said suddenly, squeezing my shoulder. We were standing at the peak of a large dune, a platform to spread my voice to the waiting subjects below. I felt my stomach shudder as I looked out on the thousands of people on their knees looking up at me, and the ever-present hanged man, dead and silent over the ocean. I shot a look over my shoulder at Luval. "What do you want me to say?" I gasped. Luval spread his hands.
"Anything you want. Tell us how you got here. Tell us how to follow you back to heaven. Tell us how to get by the hanged man."
My back was slick with sweat, and I wiped a coat of it off of my forehead, and turning back to the audience below me. My heart was thundering in my chest, and my breath blew sour across my tongue. What should I say? How would I get them to understand? Questions rolled across my mind to the point of madness. I fumbled for words to say, but they died on my tongue. I could feel myself growing scared and then frustrated. What the hell did they want from me? To hell with it. Screw this insanity. I cleared my throat. I'm not your angel," I yelled, my voice carrying down to them. "I don't know how I got here, but I can assure you it wasn't because of your prayers." I heard Luval and the others behind me gasp audibly. I continued. "I don't know where I am or who you freaks are, but I'm not your savior. I got caught in a riptide and sank into a cloudy light in the ocean. I thought I was dead. Maybe I am dead." I heard Luval growl something behind me, but I ignored him. "I don't know how to save you. I don't know how to get to heaven. I'm not the one you've been waiting for." I pointed across the ocean. "And that thing? Your almighty hanged man? He looks dead. And here you are, cowering on the beach, trembling in fear. You want to make something of yourselves? You want to transcend to a better life? Well, stop being such damn cowards and do it." I was shaking, my fists clenched by my sides, the sweat dripping from the tip of my nose. I was angry, a sudden surge brought on by the sand and heat, the continuous insistence that I was some sort of angel sent here to deliver them. Luval reached out to grab me, but I shook him off, pointing towards the water. "Stop waiting for a miracle and do it yourself. I'm not your damn angel." I was suddenly pulled down by strong hands and I fell to the ground. The sand was kicked into my face as a chorus of angry voices loomed over me. My arms were pinned to the ground and I lashed out, furious and scared, losing myself in the waking nightmare. A foot plowed into my stomach, and my will to fight left me with most of my breath. I lay gasping, blinking against the sun. A shadow fell over my face, and Luval stared down at me with fire in his eyes.
"What have you done?"
He snarled. "I can't help you freaks," I spat, wriggling against my captors. It didn't do much good. Luval shook his head at me and then stared into the eyes of the others. They nodded to him, a silent conversation passing through the air above me. "Get off of me! Let me go!" Luval leaned down and placed his lips to my ear.
"If you won't help us, then we'll find another use for you."
I stopped struggling and turned to look into his eyes. "What the hell are you talking about?" Luval licked his lips.
"If you won't show us mercy, perhaps the hanged man will. Perhaps an offering will change his mind. Perhaps an angel is the price we must pay to cross to the other side."
"Let go of me," I roared, chest heaving. "You're all insane. You don't know what you're talking about." Luval raised a hand to the others.
"Get the boat. It's time we float to eternity, my brothers."
A cry of joy went up, followed by an even louder exclamation from below us on the beach. I cocked my head in the sand and saw the mass of people standing, smiles on their faces. They pumped their fists into the air and began to chant. My blood went cold as I listened.
"Sacrifice! Sacrifice! Sacrifice!"
Before I could speak, I was roughly hauled to my feet, hands slapping and gripping me. I was pushed down the dune, a hard shove in the middle of my back. I went sprawling, hitting the slope face first. I coughed and spat as millions of burning shards scraped across my cheeks as I tumbled, rolling over myself to slide to a stop on the beach. Immediately, the mass was on me. A hand tangled in my hair and pulled me to my feet while others grabbed me and began to drag me to the water's edge. I screamed and fought, panic rising in my throat like a burning volcano. I looked over my shoulder and saw Luval striding towards me down the dune, a sick smile on his face. I was filled with terror at how quickly they had turned on me. The more I struggled, the rougher the crowd became. Fists pummeled my body, nails raked across my skin, blood and slime spattering my face. I coughed and wheezed, blinking through it all, my vision filling with 1,000 wriggling, moving bodies. The flesh pressed against me and my ears filled with the roar of a growing riot. My feet tripped and stumbled against the onslaught, and finally I fell. I felt a rope slide around my neck. Pain ignited around my throat, a circle of sudden fire as they began to drag me towards the ocean. Blinking through blood, I trained my eyes ahead of me towards the sky, and my heart stopped in my chest. The hanged man's eyes were wide open, and he was looking right at me. Fear coursed through me with the force of a raging hurricane, and I began to scream in absolute horror. The hanged man's eyes were huge and swollen, his irises 2 red orbs in a pool of blinding snow. And color shot from his sockets like searchlights, twin red funnels that filled my vision and summoned my darkest nightmares. I tried to scream, but my cries were severed by a jerk on the rope. The earth beneath me thundered with the stampede of feet and a hurried rush to the water's edge. I retched and felt my eyes bulge, my mind dimming from lack of oxygen. Mercifully, The rope was removed, and I was dragged to my feet. My world swam as I tried to focus on the bouncing, swirling ocean of people before me. My mind swam as I tried to focus on the bouncing, swirling ocean of people before me. Their long noses swayed on their faces like pendulums, and their second tongues coated their scalps excitedly. I heard a great cry rise to my left, and I weakly turned my head. They were pushing a small craft into the water, a flat construction of wood with a single mast that unfolded to reveal a great sail. My arms were pulled behind my back, and I felt my hands bound. I grit my teeth as the rope cut into my wrists, and I was yanked towards the boat. I coughed and fought to stay upright, my feet splashing into the ocean. Luval was climbing onto the craft along with 3 others. He reached down and pulled me up, then tossed me aside like a sack of dead meat. He turned to the mass of people on the beach, raising his voice.
Pray for us! Pray for mercy! Pray for salvation!
A roar went up at our backs as we were pushed out to sea. Water splashed over the crudely constructed frame, and I gagged as sea salt rushed up my nose. I was pulled into a sitting position and shoved against the mast. My bangs dripped into my eyes as I looked out into the sky. The hanged man had raised his head from his shoulders and was watching us approach. The red light that shot from his eyes blinded me, and I turned away, the spots dancing across my vision. The horror and fear filled me, and my battered, shaken body offered no comfort.
It didn't have to be like this,
Luval said behind me as he dug an oar into the ocean. The other 3 followed his example, their dripping faces watching me. Fuck you, I spat. You've all lost your minds. The water sloshed across the wooden planks as we continued to draw closer and closer to the hanged man, his massive body dangling from his heavenly chain like bait on a hook. He was waiting for us, hovering above the surface of the sea, his eyes never leaving us. As we approached, Luval raised his hand to the others and they stopped rowing. The craft slowed and I chanced to glance up, feeling a dark stirring in the back of my mind, like something was poking around from inside my head. The hanged man loomed before us, suspended a dozen feet above the calm waters. The craft was consumed in red light. I felt fear and terror boil in my brain as I fought to control a sudden urge of haunting images that flashed before me like morbid photographs. Luval got down on his knees, followed by the others. His voice shook as he spoke.
Please, we come in peace. Spare us a moment and listen to what I have to say.
The hanged man remained a statue of dark fear. Luval continued, visibly shaken.
In exchange for passage into heaven, we offer you this angel who has come to us promising salvation.
I whipped my head to stare at him. Luval shot me a look and pressed on.
He has offered to rid us of your presence, but we knew there would be no passage unless you deemed us worthy. So instead of following this angel in a revolution against you, we offer him up to you as a token of goodwill, as a token of respect, as a rite of passage. Please, take him as payment and let us pass through the red cloud into heaven.
He bowed his head and spread his arms, waiting. You liar, I snarled.
Silence,
Luval hissed. The air filled with mounting tension as the seconds ticked by. The sound of the water sloshing around the boat seemed to consume me. I shut my eyes and focused on it, shaking and trembling, feeling the red light wash over my skin. And suddenly, I heard a collective gasp and I snapped my eyes open. There, in the water below us, was a massive, voluminous cloud of sparkling red light. It extended out into the ocean like a titanic patch of fog, a swirling dance of color that churned beneath the surface. Luval stood, eyes wide.
He is allowing us passage.
The others stood staring at one another, mouths open in complete shock. Immediately they sank back to their knees, heads bowed, and began to sputter thanks and praise to the hanged man. They prostrated themselves on the boat, gushing with wonderment and promise. And then, Luval grabbed me and pulled me to my feet. "I hope you rot in hell," I growled as he pulled me over to the mast.
Quite the contrary,
he said, yanking on me. He motioned for the others to help him, and I suddenly felt the familiar coil of rope around my throat. I coughed and struggled, but was silenced with an oar to the stomach. I vomited, the bile spilling out over the deck. I craned my head to look behind me and saw they had thrown the rope over the mast. They were going to hang me. I stared up at the hanged man, his huge, terrifying eyes boring into my skull. His charred skin absorbed the sunlight around him as I fought helplessly against the rope tying my hands. This was it. This was the end. Luval was suddenly behind me. He whispered softly into my ear.
I will tell God of your cowardice when I see him.
I hardened, feeling a sudden rage burn within me. I turned my head, my voice hard steel. "No, you fucking won't." I slammed the back of my head into his face as hard as I could. I was rewarded with an ear-splitting scream as he bent down and clutched his bleeding mouth. I stepped backwards and grabbed his dangling nose with my bound hands and ripped it from his face, screaming in defiance. The tube of flesh tore from his head like strings of melted cheese, and blood exploded from the gore it left behind. Luval sank to his knees, howling as blood poured from the hole in his face. The others on the boat froze, surprised and revolted by what I had just done, the rope going limp on the deck. I charged the side of the boat and threw myself towards the water. As I flew through the air, seconds before I splashed into the ocean, I watched in horror as the hanging man dropped from the sky like an anchor releasing. I hit the water and immediately went under, my vision obscured by the murky depths. I wriggled like a dolphin, trying to free my hands, but it was hopeless. I trained my burning eyes to the red cloud beneath me. Frantically, I wriggled towards it, feeling my lungs hammer into my chest. And then the water illuminated with red light. I whipped my head to my left, bubbles exploding from my mouth, and my eyes widened in terror. The hanged man was rocketing towards me through the water, his eyes filling the depths with their haunting crimson color. The chain slithered behind him, a twisting coil like a coal-black snake. His hands reached out towards me, his fingers nothing more than slivers of nightmare darkness. The sight filled me with crippling fear, and I used it to jet myself forward, down deeper towards the cloud of phasing red. My ears suddenly filled with a muffled, haunting roar of fury, and I felt my mind quiver and splinter. I blinked, fighting off the sensation, reaching to the depths towards my salvation. I had almost reached the red cloud. I kicked towards it with all the might I could muster, screaming, leaving a trail of howling bubbles behind me. Suddenly, I was jerked backwards and I felt pain shoot through my leg. I turned around and saw the hanged man grasping my leg, pulling his body up to mine to stare into my face. My world swam and shook with the darkest, deadliest hell, and I felt all resistance drain from my body as his eyes consumed my soul. My mouth dropped open in a silent scream, and I began to fill my head and uproot every fear I had ever had. I felt madness begin to rip my mind in two. But through the agony, I heard another sound. I heard splashing, a muted rush of churning water. The hanged man turned to look towards the surface. I followed his gaze, mind fading, darkness approaching. Luval and the others had dove into the ocean and were frantically swimming towards the red cloud. The hanged man roared and looked back at me, then back at the other four. Snarling, he released me and my mind shimmered and then refocused, the red leaving my fractured brain in a rush of heat. Still bound, I watched as the hanged man raced to stop the others from entering the red cloud. I watched as he tore them apart. I watched the water fill with red. As the last bit of consciousness left me, I watched as the red faded to black as I floated down into the red cloud. I don't really remember what happened after that. I don't remember the in-between. Not even darkness. There was just nothing. And the next thing I remember was getting CPR on the beach. It was the father who had been building a sandcastle with his son. The good dad. I sputtered back to life, screaming and vomiting up gouts of salt water. I lay there on the beach, weeping as an ambulance was called. I was rushed off to the hospital and cared for, and questioned and given some much-needed rest. I've never recovered fully from that experience. I'm still not entirely sure what happened or where I went. I don't know if what I went through was even real. It's been over a year now since that incident, and I've come no closer to discovering the answers. Was the cloud real? Were those people, those creatures, real? Or did I experience some fearful hallucination between the reality of the living and the dead? As time passes, I want to discard the horrors I went through as something my mind conjured to stay alive. I want to believe that the nightmare world I went to was just some horrific dream I used to fight off death. But I can't. No matter how much I want to deny that terrible place beneath the riptide, I just can't. Because you see, after I was rushed to the hospital, the father who resuscitated me came to visit. And he told me something. He told me that when he found me, my hands were tied. Your entire life can change in a day. That's a scary thought, though, isn't it? And yet we never really expect change. We get up, go to work, come home, and expect the constant flow of normality to maintain its predictable pace. We feel like we are in control of our lives, navigating through its many channels, guiding our minds and bodies through the jungle gym of working society. We set our alarms, we lock our doors, we buy our food. We establish these pillars of control, these thought-out decisions that give us the illusion of dominating our destiny. But what if the power goes out and the alarm never goes off? What if someone breaks into your home? What if your food goes bad? What if something else is ultimately in control of your life? What if we are merely pawns in a much grander plan? What would you do if your entire life changed for the worse? I don't tell you these things to scare you. I tell you these things to prepare you. Don't try to outsmart the cosmic forces that hover all around us. Don't try to get ahead of the disaster. Don't bother locking your door. And don't worry about setting your alarm. Because in the end, none of that is going to matter. We're all gonna die. And it's gonna come sooner than you think. It may come tomorrow, it may come a year from now. But every second you're alive, death takes another step closer, and there's nothing you can do about it. I've come to realize these morbid lessons. I've been shown the brutal blade of unpredictability. I was like you once, going through life, expecting every day to mirror the last. I didn't plan for what happened. But in my defense, how could I? And that's what I'm trying to tell you. There will be random events of horror that happen in your life that you cannot prepare for. There are evils and darkness creeping closer to you that you cannot stop. So instead of blinding yourself to their existence with false security, open your mind up and expect the worst. Expect a loved one to die, and count on your wife leaving you. Expect sadness and misery, because if you do, when life decides to stab you in the heart, at least you'll be wearing some armor. It'll still hurt, you might still bleed, but it won't kill you. It won't kill you. Now, you may be listening to this and thinking my outlook on life is a little grim. You might think I'm overreacting to the possibility of tragedy. Well, let me tell you, if you've been through what I've been through, you'd be saying the same thing. But you haven't, and you're gonna blow off my warning. And you're not gonna take this seriously. You're not gonna be ready. And that's because you haven't seen a chrome sunset. I wiped sweat from my forehead and scanned my brother's farmland. The golden sun crawled down the sky, leaving streaks of twilight color that oozed across the land like melting rainbows. Purples and pinks splashed into each other amidst brilliant orange, and the cloudless sky sighed with a warm breeze. I looked across the fields, stabbing my pitchfork into the soft earth, and towards the house. I could see Pete and Ashley scampering up to the porch, where they were met by their father, my brother, Charlie. I smiled, content and happy with the days of work. I found myself unexpectedly pleased with my decision to come out and help my brother after my divorce. His own wife had died 3 years back, and mine had just left me. We were lonely men with few things in common, most of which were bad luck and heartbreak. He was a gentle man, my brother, and it had taken him a long time to recover from his wife's death. The kids had adapted as well as could be expected, and Pete doing his best to comfort his younger sister through those hard times. They were good people. Charlie was a year younger than me, always the quiet one. My heart broke along with his when his wife had died. He didn't deserve such sadness. He had always done the right thing his whole life. He was my constant voice of reason, my moral compass at life's crossroads. When my wife left me, he opened up his home to me until I recovered from the anger and despair that had rocked my state of mind. That's just the kind of person he is. His 2 kids, Pete and Ashley, mirrored their father's moral integrity, and Pete was 10 now. A strong young farm boy with an ever-present spark in his blue eyes. He took care of his little sister, who was 6, and I knew their bond would last for years to come. It was good to see them all bond together, and support one another through the hard times they had undergone. Sighing, I checked my watch and saw that it was a little after 7. My stomach grumbled and I started walking back towards the house. The barn to my right reflected the sun's brilliance off its new coat of red paint. Last week, I had helped Charlie redo the whole thing, and I was pleased to see how well our efforts had turned out. And to my left were the cornfields, stretching out for acres and rows of rolling green. They caught the sun in their swaying stalks and reached out for more, gently cracking in the warm wind. I walked between the barn and corn, along the strip of crispy grass that rolled to the front door like a red carpet. My feet crunched over it, and I breathed in the silent country air. I never knew I liked isolation until I moved out here, away from the city, away from everything. I finally made it to the porch and climbed the stairs, the dying sun hot on my back. I went inside and saw Charlie pouring lemonade. He looked up at me and smiled, holding out a glass that clinked with ice and sweet lemon. I accepted it gratefully and took a sip, the cold liquid washing down the dryness in my mouth. With a satisfied sigh, I asked him if he wanted me to make dinner tonight, but he waved my offer away. He said he was going to grill some steaks out back for us while Ashley prepared some vegetables. She might have been only 6, but that little girl had a knack for cooking. She got it from her mother, rest her soul. The kids ran into the kitchen and Charlie poured them lemonade. He asked Ashley if she would get the broccoli out of the fridge, and then asked Peter if he would feed the horses in the barn before dinner. Groaning, and Peter complied as he walked towards the door. I ruffled his hair and told him not to tell the horses we were having steak. I asked Charlie if he needed help with anything, but he pointed to the front door and told me to sit out on the porch and take it easy. I raised my glass to him as a sign of thanks and took my tired body outside. Exhaling heavily, I plopped myself down in a rocking chair and kicked my feet out in front of me. I took another sip of lemonade as I watched Pete walk to the barn. I smiled. All this hard work and sunshine was going to do him good in his later years. He just didn't know it yet. It's one of those things you don't realize as a kid. The benefits of chores your parents make you do. They slowly turn into good habits that get stuck in your mind, forming you into a better person. But when you're a kid, it's just annoying work. I watched as the sun dipped under the horizon, a half circle of burning light that watched me from beyond the distant hills. The breeze picked up and rustled through the cornfields to my right, stirring them from the earth. It was a pleasant sound, and I let it wash over me in waves of contentment. I heard Ashley in the kitchen preparing the side dishes, quietly singing to herself. I grinned, her little voice carrying through the screen door towards me. What a character she was. I drained my lemonade and set the glass down. Everything just felt so right. And that's when I noticed something in the sky. I blinked in the fading light, bringing a hand up to shade my eyes so I could see it better. It was distant, scraping the roof of the sky almost like a cloud. But it wasn't a cloud. It looked like a small circle of paint being gently swirled, its chrome colors shining in the evening air, almost like the sky had opened up to reveal something behind it. From this distance, it was the size of a dime. But as I continued to watch, it gradually grew bigger and began extending down like a funnel. I felt unease tickle my stomach. It was climbing down the sky, its eerie liquid texture reaching for the earth like a long, wet finger. Immediately, I thought it was a tornado, except it was brilliant silver and I didn't notice a change in the wind. In fact, the weather didn't change at all. The sun fell behind the horizon, its beautiful color lighting up the sky like colored ink. The chrome funnel continued its descent, widening and expanding, My heart began to race as I watched the odd surface of the liquid funnel drip closer to the earth. It didn't bend in the middle, like a twister might, but instead remained perfectly straight like a pillar. I felt the need to call Charlie, but I was held captive by the bizarre spectacle. I heard him inside, gathering the stakes to grow out back and giving instruction to Ashley, but I didn't move. The funnel had almost reached the ground. I held my breath, waiting. The tip of the chrome pillar dipped to the earth, and as it made contact, I felt a soft rumble beneath my feet. I gripped the arms of the rocking chair, the shining tower of liquid 200 yards directly in front of me, and 200 yards of grass separating us. I waited for another tremor, but none came. I looked up towards the top and realized that I couldn't see it, the stretch of silver extended beyond my eyesight. "What the hell?" I muttered. I was about to call Charlie when the air rippled with deafening sound. I covered my ears as a deep bellow echoed from the pillar. The air seemed to shimmer around me, and my head howled in pain. It sounded like a boat horn, like a freighter coming into harbor. Its low cry chilling me to the bone. My vision swam and I blinked away dancing color. I heard Ashley drop something in the kitchen and Charlie burst through the back door to see what was going on. My mouth went dry, a feeling of dread creeping up my throat. Something began to emerge from the chrome tower. I stood up, heart hammering against my ribs as I watched. It was humanoid in shape and size, made from the same shimmering silver liquid. It looked like a person, but it had no hands or feet, just rounded nubs. Its head widened up from the chin to reveal an open top with smoke pouring from it like a smokestack. It didn't move as it morphed out of the liquid, but instead glided into the open air like it was on an invisible conveyor belt. It was hundreds of feet up, but I could see its strange funnel-shaped head billowing silver smoke. And then, Charlie burst through the screen door, mouth open in confusion as to what was happening. He stopped dead in his tracks when he saw the soaring tower of chrome liquid. He turned to look at me, eyes wide, and I could offer him no explanation. The human-shaped creature that had emerged from the column was slowly floating towards the ground, still immobile. From behind the screen door, I heard Ashley gasp. Questions flowed from her mouth, but Charlie and I remained silent, the scene before us robbing our minds of reason. The strange chrome figure had almost reached the ground. I felt Charlie tense up next to me, and I couldn't help but feel a sickening anxiety. What was happening? What was this eerie phenomenon? I calmed my racing heart, licking my lips and flexing my fingers. The silver figure's rounded nubs touched the earth, and it came to life. I gasped as it moved, and taking a slow step in our direction, its body leaning forward as if it was fighting against a strong wind. The smoke poured from its open head, thick silver cotton that swirled up into the gentle wind. It was a couple 100 yards away, but the distance didn't make us feel any safer. This thing was coming for us. I didn't know what it was or what its intentions were, and that filled me with uneasy fear. I heard Charlie speaking urgently to Ashley, but I barely heard him. Something was happening again with the chrome cylindrical tower. The air seemed to hum and move around it, distorting like it was emitting intense heat. The smooth surface rippled slightly, and I felt my breath die in my lungs. More of the strange figures were morphing out of the column, all frozen in the air like they were products on a moving belt. That strange smoke poured from their heads, a wispy heartbeat of unknown meaning. They began to descend, all gently gliding towards the earth like wet statues. I swallowed hard as I counted 12 of them in total, including the one slowly making its way toward us. They looked like mannequins, but with thicker appendages and no visible joints or features. Their fingerless rounded arms and legs ended in smooth nubs that reminded me of giant pinballs. Blinking back shock, I realized that Ashley was yelling at Charlie and I. I hadn't even noticed Charlie was still next to me. I snapped out of my trance and turned to Ashley, gripping Charlie's arm and shaking him slightly. He looked at me with complete disbelief, and I saw panic pooling in his eyes. I turned to Ashley, asking her what it was she was trying to tell us. She pushed the screen door open and told us to follow her quickly. Charlie and I did, the two of us moving like shell-shocked zombies. We clambered through the house, following Ashley through the kitchen and out the back door. As we pushed through the door, I froze and felt the cold fist of fear slam into my stomach. Another chrome funnel was extending from the sky behind the house. Charlie was suddenly shaking me, his eyes wide and his breath stinking with panic. "Oh my God, Peter's in the barn. We need to get him, now." I felt my gut sink and kicking myself for not realizing it sooner. The spectacle had held me captive, erasing all sense from my mind. I ran into the house, not waiting for Charlie. I crashed through the front door and skidded to a stop. The shimmering creatures had all landed and were now slowly walking towards the house, their bodies bent forward like they were walking uphill. And then I saw Pete step out of the barn, not 50 yards from the leading figure. And from where I stood, I could hear his cry of shocked fear. Immediately, the forms turned to look at him, alerted by his fearful outburst. Oh no. They turned and started walking towards the barn. I cut my hands to my mouth and shouted for Peter to get back inside, to hide and stay put until I could get to him. They were going to get there before I could. And then who knows what they'd do. Charlie almost knocked me over as he charged onto the porch, and I grabbed him before he reached the steps. I spun him around and pointed to Ashley, who was behind us. Big tears rolled down her cheeks, and she reached out for her father, fear engulfing her. I told Charlie I'd go get Peter, that he needed to keep his daughter safe and to lock up the back door. I could see he was torn, indecision cementing him where he stood, and so I pushed him towards Ashley. He scooped her up in his arms, and she cried into his shoulder. "Where's the shotgun?" I asked, knowing he had one. He jerked his head. "Follow me, and hurry." We rushed back inside, and he placed Ashley on the kitchen counter. He took a quick glance out the back door before slamming it shut and locking it. Before he did, I could see figures glide into the earth. Charlie rushed to the pantry and tore the door open. He reached up behind the door frame and pulled down a shotgun. He tossed it to me and I checked the feed. "It's loaded," he said, going to Ashley and picking her up again. "Now go, hurry, please." Wordlessly, I charged out the front door, the barrel of the gun cold in my hands. The light had almost faded from the sky, the last remnants of dark purple bleeding into black. But I could see the shining figures, the rising moon illuminating their silver bodies. They were almost to the barn, and I saw that Peter had gone back inside and had closed the big door. The figures were gathering before it, their odd arms prodding the wood, examining the strange red barrier. I quickly took stock of my options, and then ran down the steps and off to the left, and planning to circle around to the far end of the barn. I kept my distance, and praying to make it before the figures got inside. I kept them in constant eyesight, watching as they ran their smooth arms across the door. I was about 20 yards behind them, their smoking heads creating a thick smog as they all clustered together. My feet quietly swung me around towards the side of the barn, holding my breath as I passed parallel to the creatures on my right. They didn't seem to notice me, and I breathed a sigh of relief as they became obscured from view by the side of the barn. I raced to the small door at the far end, going at full sprint now that I was out of their line of vision. The full moon glowed overhead, its light reflected by the strange towering column. I felt relieved that more figures weren't morphing out of its liquid walls. Breathless, I reached the door and pulled it open. The familiar smell of straw and animals filled my nose as I quickly stepped inside. I closed the door and let my eyes adjust to the dark. "Peter," I hissed urgently. I heard movement to my left and I swung the shotgun up and found myself staring at Peter's terrified face. I lowered the gun and embraced him in a hug, and telling him I was glad he was okay. He asked what was going on, what was happening, and I admitted that I had no clue. He was scared, but not hysterical, and I admired him for that. I took his hand and pulled him towards the door. I opened it and let out a scream, stumbling back. One of the creatures stood before me, its shining chrome body a solid foot taller than myself. It must have seen me and followed me back here. I pushed Peter behind me and brought the shotgun up. Without pause, I pulled the trigger and the gun bucked in my hands, the report deafening in the enclosed space. The buckshot rocketed into the figure, tearing half of its spout-like head in half. The thick smoke bled from the open wound as silver substance splattered onto the ground in wet chunks. The creature let out a loud cry from its gaping hole and sunk to its knees, that familiar boat horn sound slamming into my ears. I took a step back as its body crashed to the earth, where it remained motionless. Slowly, its body began to seep into the dirt and hay, evaporating where it lay. They must have heard that. Come on, Pete, we need to move. We exited the barn, the night humming with the echo of night bugs. I peeked around the corner of the barn and my throat tightened with fear. The creatures were walking towards us, following the noise of the gunshot. I grabbed Pete's arm and pulled him after me, racing around the opposite side of the barn back towards the house. I looked over my shoulder at the looming chrome tower and slowed my pace, unable to help myself. It was pulsing with white color like a lighthouse. Its glow illuminated the night in brief flashes of blinding brilliance, and I suddenly felt the ground tremble beneath my feet. About 100 feet up, I saw the surface of the liquid tower beginning to shimmer. "Oh no," I muttered, a trickle of sweat running down my spine. And Pete was frozen next to me, his breath hoarse in the wind. Another of the figures emerged, gliding out from the surface as if breaking the calm of a still pond. "It's regenerating," I said, shaking my head. And then I heard Ashley scream from the inside of the house and I snapped out of my trance. I grabbed Peter again and dragged him along behind me. As we raced towards the house, I could see the second tower glaring over the roof at us. God, what is happening? I thought, my mind ragged. We ran up the porch steps and charged through the front door. I had the shotgun raised, ready to blast away anything that wasn't my family. And Charlie was dragging the kitchen table over to the back door, the sweat standing out on his forehead. Something on the other side was pounding against it, the wood groaning from the force. Ashley let out another scream as we entered the house, but relief calmed her features as she ran into her brother's arms. I closed and locked the front door and ran to Charlie, and placing the shotgun on the kitchen counter. "There's got to be another 12 of them out there," he cried as we barricaded the back door. "What are we supposed to do?" I winced as the figures pounded on the blocked door. "I don't think we can kill them. I shot one of them and it melted, but a couple seconds later it morphed back out of that weird tower." And Peter called to us from the front window, Ashley tangled in his arms. We rushed to them both and I looked out to where Peter was pointing. I felt my stomach sink. The figures from the first tower were walking towards the house, their bodies leaning forward as if it took considerable effort. I looked at Charlie and his eyes met mine. Neither of us had a plan. But then, we all jumped as something crashed upstairs. It sounded like something falling from the ceiling, an eruption of wood and splinter. "Oh no," I whispered, feeling my skin go cold. I ran to the counter and picked up the shotgun, chambering around. I instructed Charlie and the kids to go into the living room as we heard heavy feet thump across the ceiling towards the stairs. The figures had climbed the roof and smashed their way in. As Charlie herded the children into the other room, I flinched, a large silver arm crashing through the back door. I turned the shotgun towards the hole and pulled the trigger as a large smoking head peered inside. I was rewarded by a long, howling horn, a sure sign I had seriously heard it. I swung around, a sudden noise catching my attention. And two of the creatures were at the top of the stairs, the silver fumes leaking from their heads and drifting along the ceiling towards me. I raised my gun and blasted one of them in the knees. Immediately, the volume of smoke increased drastically and it fell, tumbling down the stairs. I tried to jump out of the way, but its wide head thumped into my legs and I went sprawling. My face bounced against the hard floor and I saw stars. I could hear the thing squirming and moaning behind me and I grit my teeth. Get up, get up. I heaved myself to my feet, my vision swimming, and heard the front door begin to shake with heavy blows. Oh, we're never getting out of here, I thought. And then another part of me ignited, a defiance to the impossible situation I was in, a fire in my chest that spread and boiled my blood. This would not be our end. Something swung into my legs again, and I caught myself on the counter, breaking my fall. The figure with the blown-out knees was swinging its silver nubs at me. I coughed and felt my eyes water as the kitchen filled with smoke. I scrambled, looking for the shotgun, knowing I had seconds before the second one was on me. The creature swatted at my legs again, but I jumped aside, grabbing onto a kitchen chair. Enough was enough. I grabbed the chair and hoisted it over my head, screaming, and brought it crashing down into the chrome beam. Wood exploded across the floor as the chair shattered and I grabbed a fragmented leg. Howling, eyes wild, I drove it into the thing's face. My ears cracked as a dying howl erupted from the figure, and smoke immediately ceased pouring from its head. Without stopping, I snapped my eyes up and saw that the second one had reached the foot of the stairs. Its sudden appearance startled me, and I stumbled back, falling on my ass, again. I felt something hard against my hand, and I saw that it was the shotgun, shoved along the side of the counter. I snatched it up and pointed it at the advancing silver statue. I blew the bastard to hell and back again, the roar of the shotgun crackling in the thick air. As it fell, I watched as the bodies slowly evaporated, disappearing back into whatever substance they were birthed from. Charlie was screaming from the living room. I swung around and saw him and Pete shoving the couch against the front door as the figures beat against it from outside. It wasn't going to hold out much longer. A noise behind me drew my attention, and I swung the barrel of the shotgun towards the back door just as it gave way. The kitchen table was pushed aside as the silver-skinned monsters crowded the doorway, all pushing to get in. I emptied the shotgun into them, yelling for Charlie, and when the gun clicked dry, I flipped it around and began to beat them with the stock. 3 went down, blasted apart by the shells, and another 2 staggered back against my onslaught. I was sweating, screaming, my muscles tight as I brought the gun around and smashed it into one of their smoking heads. It fell to the side and crashed into the doorframe before sliding to its knees. I swung the gun like a baseball bat, crushing its featureless face. The howling horn of death followed. Charlie was at my side, gripping a leg from the broken chair. He battered the beams as they continued to pour into the house, a desperate energy igniting us. He stabbed one in the face, like I had earlier, and it fell back, leaving a splash of wet silver on the sharp wood. Ashley was screaming behind us, and I heard the front door start to give. My heart hammered in my chest as I listened to the wood splinter. I shot a look over my shoulder, and Peter was standing on the couch, pressing against the door, and trying to slow their progress. I heard heavy footsteps from upstairs. More were coming. "Charlie, I need more shells," I screamed, swinging the gun around and crashing another one in the face. It stumbled backwards into another two and fell, stunned. "They're upstairs in my bedroom," Charlie yelled, running behind him to help Peter. Ashley was in the corner, crying and clutching her knees to her chest, wet tears flowing down her distraught face. No good, I thought. They'll be all over me. I whipped around, ready to help Peter at the door, and froze as two more came walking down the stairs in front of me. The smoke filled the air and they turned away from me towards Ashley. Screaming, I charged them. One of them spun, bringing his arm up and swung at me. Surprised, I tried to duck, but the blow caught me across the nose. It was like getting hit with cold iron, and my nose erupted in a fountain of blood as I fell back, dazed. They turned away from me and kept walking towards Ashley. I blinked back darkness, gritting my teeth. Not the kids, I thought, hauling myself up. I charged again and slammed into one of them, tackling it to the ground with a heavy crash. Its body was ice cold under me as I rolled up on top of it. I laced my fingers together to form a giant fist and brought it down into the thing's face. As I made contact, I heard Charlie rocket into the second one, smashing it against the wall, screaming for Ashley to get away. The creature under me swung at me, clearly slowed by my blow, and I grunted as its silver nub plowed into my ribs. I thought I heard something crack, and the wind was rod from my lungs. I didn't stop beating it, though, bringing my now bleeding fists into its face over and over again. I took another shot to the ribs, but I managed to twist away in time so that my shoulder took the brunt. But suddenly, Peter was looming over us, and I jumped back as he brought a lamp down into the thing's face. It howled and I rolled away as he did it again, silencing the monster. Without stopping, I scrambled to my feet and went to help Charlie, who was pinned under the creature and taking a beating. His face was bloody, but I saw fire in his eyes. I took a giant step and punted the thing under its face, cracking its head up and tumbling it off of Charlie. I pulled him to his feet and then stood over the stunned creature. And panting, roaring, I stomped on his face until the horn of death sounded. But then the front door exploded inward. 6 of the creatures pushed their way inside, turning to face us. Footsteps thundered above as more piled in from upstairs. My ribs hurt, and blood ran down my face. I was gasping, holding my side, exhausted. I looked at Charlie, and we looked behind us at the kids. We charged the figures, roaring. I wrapped my arms around the front two as I plowed into them, bringing them down with me. Charlie soared over me, slamming his body into the other 4 like a human cannonball. Sucking in hungry lungfuls of smoky air, I hammered my fists into anything that glowed silver. I winced as something thudded into my back, but I kept focus on the one beneath me. My knuckles were bloody lumps of mangled bone and flesh, but I never stopped beating on them. But then, something crashed into me, sending me airborne. I thudded into the wall, air forced from my body in an agonized exhale of blood and sweat. I slid to the floor and fought a blackout. My head ached, my back screamed, and red dripped into my eyes. I blinked, vision swimming, and looked up. 2 of the figures tore Charlie in half, at the waist. My body hitched in disbelief as blood pooled onto the floor and my brother's guts spilled around his ripped body. No. Please, God, no. The 2 creatures dropped the halves of my brother and advanced on Ashley. Peter crashed into them, screaming, tears running down his face. I tried standing, darkness filling my vision. The 2 creatures battered Peter away and then stood over him. "You leave him alone, you godless fucks," I screamed, spitting out another mouthful of blood, crawling to them. My hands left bloody prints on the floor as I inched my way towards them. The two creatures looked at me, and then at each other. For the first time, they seemed to communicate with one another, exchanging sound and smoke in short bursts of what I could only assume was their language. They knelt in front of Peter, pinning him to the ground. "Don't you touch him," I howled, hacking up another mouthful of blood. I couldn't move, my body giving up. My mutilated hands shook as I begged them to pull me closer, but I was completely expended. The two creatures placed their nubs over Peter's splayed-out body. In unison, they emitted a new sound, a low ping that deafened me. I squeezed my eyes shut as the sound continued, blasting through my skull like sharp knives hammered in through my ears. I coughed as smoke crawled down my throat. I felt my eyes water and blood drip from my chin. I blinked through the haze, trying to see what they were doing. What I saw brought a scream blasting up my throat. Peter was covered in their silver liquid, his body cocooned in the chrome substance, but it was sliding off of him, pulling itself up his body from his feet, like a curtain being raised. And what it left behind ripped horror from my chest. Peter was slowly being turned into a tangled mass of working machinery. As the silver substance rose up his legs, it left behind coiled wires and humming steel. His legs were not legs anymore, but instead, one long block of thrumming, blinking machinery. Red and blue lights flashed from the twisted construction, hundreds of parts shifting and adjusting to lightning-quick calculations and adjustments. I watched, helpless, as Peter screamed, the chrome liquid pulling up his waist to his chest. It left in its wake the same impossible apparatus, a contorted engine of unknown workings. The contorted automaton purred with life, using Peter's body as a vessel. And then it covered his face, leaving in its wake a still screaming child, his features covered by the living machine. The creatures stood, looking down at their work, and Peter's body was barely recognizable. A heap of steel and smoke, blinking lights and throbbing parts, all moving and working to the heartbeat of their own making. And yet, Peter was still screaming, his voice cutting through the hum of machinery. He was still alive. I fought to move, fought to do something, but I could feel my body shutting down. Everything ached in severe pain, but there was nothing to be done. I dragged my face across the floor to look at Ashley, who was curled up in the corner, eyes wide, face a deathly pale. She wasn't screaming anymore, her mind trapped in shock. I could see her blue lips moving, but no sound came out. Her eyes slowly altered between her dead father and her screaming metal brother. The two figures filling the house looked down at the two of us, their eyeless heads puffing hot smoke. Slowly, they turned away and began to leave. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't accept it. Why were they leaving? What had been the point of all of this? What had they done to Peter? Why weren't they killing me? As they walked back through the front door, I turned my head to look out the front window into the night. The towering column of chrome was blinking with light, a steady throb of pulsing white. The creatures walked back to it, their bodies leaning forward as thick plumes of smoke darkened the night. The tower was pulsing in rhythm, with the lights on Peter's body. As I opened my mouth to call out to Ashley, darkness rushed in on me and swept away my consciousness. I fell into it, the empty arms of the great black. When I woke up, I was in the hospital. I was confused and distorted, and immediately asked where Ashley was. The doctors told me she was being taken care of and that she was okay. When I asked for Peter, they didn't answer, instead shooting one another a knowing look. My whole body was killing me, a mass of knotted pain. I tried to get up, screaming, roaring for answers, asking where my nephew was, but I was quickly silenced as a nurse jabbed a needle into my arm. That was 3 months ago. Apparently that night, at some point, Ashley had called 911. I don't remember any of that. The police? The paramedics? The ambulance? Nothing. I can't imagine what they thought when they walked into that house. When they saw Charlie. When they found Peter, still screaming. Recovering from that night hasn't been easy, both mentally and physically. I'm doing physical therapy, each day a painful reminder of the horror I've seen. Ashley is doing better, but I know there are parts of her that will never heal. Going through something like that at such a young age opens bloody wounds that'll never close. I was questioned about the events that night. Over and over again, I was questioned. No one really believes me. No one really understands what we've been through. No one believes in the possibility of horrors from another plane of existence splicing into our world. After all, there was no evidence of them, besides the wreckage of the house. Their bodies just evaporated back into that damn tower. And then the tower evaporated into the night sky. They didn't completely discredit my story, though. Apparently, others had seen the 2 silver pillars rising into the sky. They're calling it a chrome sunset, a never-before-seen natural phenomenon. They don't know what the fuck they're talking about. But I believe that deep down, they know I'm telling the truth. They know that something inhuman invaded our little home in the country. They know because they won't let me see Peter. I don't know where they took him, what has happened to him, but I bet you he's still screaming around that mass of machinery. It doesn't matter. None of it does. You see, I think I know what those monsters did to my dear nephew. And if I'm right, we're all fucked. Because I think they created a living, breathing, tracking device. I think they marked him so they know exactly how to get back.